Hörsinja Rex, and this is War in Ukraine Summarized 2022 Animated History with Channel the Armchair Historian. Oh, I guess this is only going to be until the December 2022 since it says that, I don't know. Or because it started, I don't know. But yeah, this is a surprise. Armchair Historian usually doesn't cover ongoing conflicts like something that is going today, right? It's usually history, basically the past, right? What is happening today is not history because it's happening today. It's gonna be history one day. So usually that's not what he covers. But yeah, this is a surprise. Armchair Historian is really great in covering something that is a short documentary, as in 20-minute, 30-minute type of thing, and he does that really well. So this is gonna be a good video. I guess Kings and Generals are doing the same series, but they're doing in major parts like 10, 15, 20 part series or something like that. This is just one video. So this is just 15 minutes, so it's going to be, interesting, let's just say. All right, let's watch it.
From widespread destruction to one of the largest refugee crises in the world, consequences of the war in Ukraine have reverberated globally. Today, we're going to delve into the 2022 events from the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian, and this is the War in Ukraine 2022. Our historical strategy game, Fire and Maneuver, has left early access and is available now. Check it out with the link below. In order to understand the origins of the war, it is crucial to examine the events that triggered the Ukrainian-Russian crisis, starting with the annexation of Crimea and the outbreak of hostilities in Donbass. In early 2014, the Euromaidan protests led to the ousting of Ukraine's pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych. Soon after, Yanukovych fled to Russia. A wave of pro-Russian unrest erupted in eastern and southern Ukraine. Simultaneously, unmarked Russian troops, which had already been stationed in military bases within Crimea, took control of government buildings, strategic sites, and infrastructure. In March, Moscow would hold a highly contentious referendum which led to Crimea being annexed by Russia. The results of this referendum were not recognized by the international community. Soon after,
so outing of the pro-Russian president from Ukraine, right? That was a big step, big moment that kind of triggered this, because usually the former Soviet countries, right, even though they are no longer Soviet, they, somewhat agree with him or is pro-Russian, basically, or agree with Russia, Putin, basically, in some way or, some place here and there. So in that way, even though there is no longer Soviet Union, basically you're under the hand of Russia. That's how they always conducted, at least in the mind of Russia, right? So when this happened, this was also kind of blow to ego in a way. Obviously, it's a blow to a lot of, business sector, but mostly, I think it was mostly also blow to ego. Like, how dare you go against Russia in that way? So I guess that was one of the key point, at least in Putin's mind, to trigger this, and then it just escalated from there.
After, armed pro-Russian separatists seized government buildings in Donbass and proclaimed the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. The separatists received considerable covert support from Russia, and Ukrainian attempts to fully retake the separatist-held areas were unsuccessful. The fighting would continue in 2015, especially around Donetsk, Luhansk, and Mariupol, with the separatists intent on gaining control of the oblasts. Still, the front lines would soon become largely static. As a result, in February 2015, Russia and Ukraine signed the Minsk II agreements in a bid to end the conflict, although the agreements were never fully implemented. The Donbass War settled into a violent but effectively frozen conflict, with many brief ceasefires, no lasting peace, and few changes in territorial control. A major escalation would happen 3 years later, as the Russian Coast Guard fired upon and captured 3 Ukrainian Navy vessels after they attempted to transit from the Black Sea into the Sea of Azov. The Kerch Strait incident flared up tensions, and martial law was briefly declared by Ukraine in fears that a full-scale war would soon break out between the two countries. But new conflict did not come. Nevertheless, as soon as Crimea was annexed, Moscow had begun to integrate the regions under their control, issuing hundreds of thousands of Russian passports to Ukrainian citizens. This violent status quo continued for years until the beginning of 2021, when Russia built up a large military presence near its border with Ukraine, including from neighboring Belarus. The Kremlin denied—
See, that's the thing. After the annexing Crimea, obviously they had planned to attack Ukraine like they did, but that took a long time, a lot of years. And yet during this war, lots of Russian equipment failed. Didn't they pre-checked it? Like they had a long window to check it. Ukraine is the one who got caught off guard, right? But Russia was already planning. So since 2014, didn't they have enough years to check if the tanks are working properly and things like that? Why did they just half-ass the attack? Or, they didn't want to attack, and one day, I guess, Putin suddenly just realized, screw it, let's just attack. Is that what happened? Because that surprises me. Like, you had a long window to check your equipments.
Any ill will regarding these troop concentrations, stating that they were in the area to perform military exercises. Nonetheless, Russian President Vladimir Putin accused Ukraine of infringing on the rights of Russian speakers and used Ukrainian collaboration with the Germans in the Second World War to accuse some in the Kyiv government of supporting neo-Nazis. Putin argued that Ukraine never had a tradition of genuine statehood, rather that Lenin had created it by carving a Soviet republic out of Russian imperial land, and that Stalin and Khrushchev expanded Ukraine after the Second World War. Putin continued to criticize the enlargement of NATO publicly and demanded that Ukraine be barred from ever joining. Alongside this, he also demanded the removal of multinational forces stationed in NATO's Eastern European member states. These demands were rejected by NATO, and Ukraine, under US influence, continues to seek more integration with the West. Creating an objective documentary on current events can be a daunting task for creators who want to convey the facts without any sort of bias towards one side or the other. Thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Ground News, we didn't need to spend hours skimming through headlines and copy.
See, lots of demands that got rejected, right, by NATO. I mean, obviously they're going to reject it. Like, if they're given to Putin's demand, they're like, you got scared of Putin or something like that. But at the same time, by rejecting, Putin also kind of got cornered in a way, because obviously, as a GDP wise, Russia is not the top country, right? Over the time, their influence is kind of like military power, but like, is it military power, this and that? So it was kind of diminishing slowly, and now, NATO is not even, acknowledging, right, Russia's superiority that way. That in the past, when Russia has said like, do not touch these areas, do not let this join, during the collapse of Soviet Union, during the late times, right? And NATO's like, fine, we won't provoke you. But now they just point blank rejected, let more and more countries into NATO. So this kind of, as a globally, pushed Putin in the corner, like, if I don't do something now, nobody's going to take me seriously, something like that. So I guess nobody could have predicted that Putin's just gonna invade a country outright. But at hindsight, when you see it like this, it kind of like, you can kind of see this coming.
Looking for impartial coverage in researching for this video. Ground News is a website and app that combines articles from thousands of local and national outlets in one place, so readers can see the full picture by giving you a quick visual breakdown of the news outlets doing the reporting, including their political bias, how factual the source is, what entities own the source, and which countries are covering the story. For example, if we look up the Ukraine war topic on Ground News website, we can see all of the articles published in the last 3 months. And if we take a look at this article on the leaked Pentagon documents, we can see there's 33 other sources reporting on it, with 6 leaning left, 7 leaning right, and 5 leaning center. From here, we can read and compare all the headlines reporting on this story to see how language plays a factor in shaping our understanding of an event, and even click in to read the article from its original source to dive deeper. Check out the article at ground.news/armchair, and if you support the mission and want to support our channel, sign up for free or subscribe for unlimited access to stay fully informed on breaking news, compare coverage, and avoid media bias. On February 21st, Putin announced that the Russian government would diplomatically recognize the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. The same evening, Putin directed that Russian troops deploy into Donbass in what Russia referred to as a peacekeeping mission. In response, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky ordered a 30-day nationwide state of emergency and the mobilization of all reservists. On the morning of February 24th, Putin announced a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Minutes later, air and missile strikes were conducted across the country. This was followed shortly thereafter by a large ground invasion along multiple fronts. Zelensky declared martial law and a general mobilization of all male Ukrainian citizens between 18 and 60 who were banned from leaving the country. Russian attacks were initially launched on a northern front from Belarus toward Kyiv, a northeastern front toward Kharkiv, a southern front from Crimea, and a southeastern front from Donbass. Many expected the invasion to be a short affair that would go in Russia's favor, with even the Americans offering Zelensky evacuation, but the Ukrainians resisted. The Northern Front, which was supposed to be a dash to Kyiv to topple the government, stalled after initial gains. A daring airborne assault to capture the Antonov airport also failed after the damaging of the ensuing battle, which the Russians won, rendered the airport inoperable. The Russians would be halted at the suburbs of Kyiv during the month-long battles of Irpin, Hostomel, and Bucha. Russian logistical issues were evidently seen, as their columns stretched for kilometers in a traffic jam. The Ukrainian military quickly took advantage of this vulnerability, ambushing Russian vehicles and further worsening their supply situation. By April, Russian command had realized that their offensive had run out of steam and decided to withdraw from the Kyiv front to redeploy elsewhere. Ukrainians later discovered that a number of civilians were executed in Bucha when Russian forces left the area. Russian fortunes were different in the south, with the recapture of the North Crimean Canal on the day the invasion started. The canal, which had previously supplied 85% of Crimea's drinking and irrigation water, was blocked by Ukraine after its Russian annexation. As such, its capture represented an important objective for Moscow. 2 days later, the siege of Mariupol began as the Russian army linked east with the separatist-held Donbass.
That was some
Russian
ridiculous
forces would
Mariupol
also alarm
siege,
the
man.
international community by attacking the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, stoking fears of a potential nuclear catastrophe. At the
Yeah.
time of making this video, the power plant remains under Russian control. Russian troops would also attack from Crimea.
Yeah, there was some panicky shit right there about the nuclear plants, right? Because there was also a Chernobyl thing that people are saying like that's gonna turn out bad, and the other plant, right? And there was a videos where carelessly soldiers walking around and causing that basically could have gone worse, and especially missile strikes were very close to the plants. Like what the fuck? If the missiles are a bit here and there, that could turn out really bad. And how the nuclear radiation would spread out, it would have fucked up a lot of countries in Europe. So that was a real issue that I guess right now could have been really different, right? We would have been learning about it really different. Lots of other countries could have caught in it. And I'm guessing that it could have escalated really badly if that had happened, because everybody would clearly blame, all on Russia, like this is Russians' indirect attack or whatever, or other countries. But yeah.
Toward the west, with many theorizing that Russia wanted to push to Odessa and link up with the pro-Russian separatist region of Transnistria in Moldova. It was on this front that the first major Ukrainian city, Kherson, fell to the Russian army. The fall of Kherson was accompanied by the capture of Antonovsky Bridge. Holding this strategic crossing over the Dnieper River would allow Russian forces to attack the important junction city of Mykolaiv. The Russians attempted to take the city but were repelled, stopping their advance toward Odessa. In the east, the Russian army attempted to capture Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. While Kharkiv is less than 35 kilometers from the Russian border, the Ukrainians put up strong resistance. Subsequently, the city was continuously bombarded and shelled as Russian forces tried to surround the city. Although they had some success, especially toward
Yeah, those real life lore videos about the photos of before and after, that was so fucked up. Seeing those buildings destroyed, everything just walls crumbling, holes in the walls, and holy shit. Like if you tell anybody in 2015 like this is how Ukraine is going to be in 5-6 years, they will be like, what are you talking about? This is so fucked up, man, seeing this. A lot of things, a lot of cities got destroyed completely. Even when the war is over, who knows what the result is going to be, but when the war is over, right, this is gonna carry on for decades, just the aftermath of it. Like how badly everything's destroyed.
Toward the southeast, with the taking of Izium, the Russian push toward Kharkiv ultimately petered out. Amid the heightened shelling of Kharkiv, on March 31st, a helicopter strike took place against an oil supply depot inside Russia in the city of Belgorod, noteworthy as it happened on the other side of the border. The Kremlin was quick to blame Kyiv, while Ukraine denied responsibility. Advance from the Donbass was slower in comparison to the other fronts.
Okay, how does that work? Oh, look, you're invading my country, but now you're bitching about me destroying your oil reserves. Like, I mean, come on. Ukraine's like, no, that wasn't us. I don't know. I guess this, gives Russia some fuel to justify some attack here and there. That's why they, I guess said like that wasn't us. Otherwise, like commonsensically sitting here, like you just destroyed half of my fucking country, and I attack you and you're bitching about it.
As the region had already been the setting of battles since 2014. As a result, Ukrainian troops there were already well entrenched. Meanwhile, the siege of Mariupol was underway. The battle included troops from the regular Russian army, as well as the Donetsk People's Republic militia. The urban warfare for control of the city was slow and bloody. In an official statement, the United Nations confirmed the deaths of 1,348 civilians in Mariupol, but
Probably
warned
much
that the
higher.
true death toll was likely higher.
Yeah,
The
much
UN
higher.
also reported that 90% of the city's residential buildings had been damaged or destroyed.
90%.
The city's
So
defenders
nothing's
were
left,
eventually
basically.
cornered into the Azovstal Steelworks, a maze of a metallurgical facility that served as a well-defensible position. As a result, on April 21st, Putin ordered Russian troops not to storm it, opting to blockade it instead. The Russians did continue to shell the steelworks, with heavy airstrikes on the 27th and 28th of April.
Damn, this is the first visual, basically, animation that I'm seeing about this. Look at that. This is why I love this channel, right? Because everybody other talks on a graph or whatever the photo they have, basically also from the, satellite or something. No, I don't think I've seen anyone creating this kind of animation about it.
The humanitarian crisis in the city was becoming increasingly dire, and after a visit by the UN Security General to Moscow, the United Nations and the Red Cross started to run evacuations throughout a humanitarian corridor. Many civilians were still trapped in the steelworks, although they would continue to be pulled out during the following days. By May 7th, the Ukrainian government reported that all of the civilians in the steel plant had been evacuated. With many heavily injured and low on ammunition, food, and supplies, the remaining defenders surrendered by the 20th. 6 days later, Russia reopened the port of Mariupol to commercial vessels following mine removal. With Ukraine being a major producer of wheat, the taking, blockading, and mining of its Black Sea ports had serious global repercussions, with increased wheat prices and the threat of famine, especially in the Middle East. As a result, the Black Sea theater has also been significant.
Yeah, that surprised me also from the real life lore video. Basically a lot of Middle East countries, African countries kind of relied on Ukraine basically for lots of grains and things, and because of this conflict they were all halted. Like how much famine it would have caused, like damn, I didn't see that coming. So one war in one place, that's what I've been saying in a lot of time, like we live in a global trading time where I remember something happening in UK, I guess, a few years ago, and that kind of downing the whole economy of the world. Like just something happens in UK, I don't know what it was, but that kind of downed the entire economy of the world at that time. And that made me think like, holy shit, everything's connected. And now this war, I mean, I'm surprised that how it didn't tank the economy of the world, right? Right now, I guess whatever economy is still better than I thought it would have been. So, but yeah, it could cause a major famine still, right? The future is still undecided because of this, how much effect it's going to have in Africa and Middle East and lots of places. Yeah, this is fucked up. And the Mariupol thing, that was surprise, right? The how bravely they fought and just kept going until the last point, and then they surrendered. This whole conflict has been a surprise because Russia's this stigma that like Russia and US are top two military power. I mean, Ukraine doesn't even come close, right? And when you hear that Russia full-blown just invaded Ukraine, all civilians like were making like this makeshift Molotovs here and there, and that the whole drive to defend the country was really, great to see. Because if you were ask anybody before, like, a few years ago, like if this scenario happened, what happens? Like you would think like some fighting here and there, but eventually they just surrenders pretty quickly. And that's what the Russia thought when they attacked, like this is going to over quickly. That's why they just raced towards the Kyiv, thinking that they're just going to give up, like we are Russia and this is Ukraine, come on. It was surprising how, strong resistance they gave and still, doing it basically.
The Russian Navy drew first blood, taking control of Snake Island after their cruiser Moskva bombarded it.
Go after
Russia
yourself.
has an overwhelming advantage at sea, which became even more pronounced once the Ukrainian Navy scuttled its flagship, the frigate Hetman Sahayadechny. Despite this, Ukraine managed to somewhat even the odds by sinking the Moskva with 2 Neptune anti-ship cruise missiles. However, the Kremlin denies this, claiming that it was a munition explosion caused by a fire. Eventually, Moscow and Kyiv would reach an agreement brokered
they're not gonna admit that their best ship just got destroyed by Ukraine. Come on.
By the UN and Turkey, aiming to resume grain exports. After the retreat from Kyiv, the Russian military concentrated their efforts on the south and the east. Although they managed some advances, the Ukrainian military managed to hold the line for the most part. On the 6th of September, prompted by the...
Of course they're going to do it at south, because if Ukraine really pushes them back and now it starts to take Crimea back, which they are claiming like we're going to take all the Ukraine back this time, like also Crimea. Imagine Putin's whole scenario in Russia. Like not just I didn't gain anything, I even lost Crimea now. That would be even more worse.
Wave of military aid from the west, Ukraine launched a surprise counteroffensive in Kharkiv, which successfully cleared the surrounding areas and eliminated any risk of losing the city. 15 days later, Putin announced partial mobilization, which was followed by an exodus of young Russian men from the country. In late September, Moscow would organize referendums in the Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia oblasts, and hurriedly proclaimed their annexations to the Russian Federation. These oblasts were not completely occupied by Russian forces, and the majority of the international community do not recognize the claims of the annexation. At the same time, the Ukrainian military was conducting an offensive in the south. Although it would take them months, the Ukrainians managed to disrupt Russian supply lines to the point that it made their positions on the western bank of the Dnieper untenable. This was worsened by an attack on the Kerch Strait Bridge, which was a crucial supply line. After repeated attacks and being forced back, the Russian military decided to retreat from the provincial capital back to the eastern bank, successfully completing an orderly withdrawal. In the wake of the success of the Kherson offensive, the war had shifted back to the Donbass, where Wagner Group mercenaries have been involved in intense fighting to capture Bakhmut. This stage of the war has been characterized by brutal fighting with little forward movement for either side. With sites of trenches and a pronounced no man's land, some have called this phase reminiscent of the First World War. A first among our...
That Wagner Group thing, I didn't heard of that before, and one day I heard like, what the fuck, they involved private military there, and there's also some issue going on with the leader right now or something, some issue with the Russia now they have. I don't know what is going there, right? I'm not following news that closely now. But yeah, that surprised me. Like, they're involving private military, what the fuck? Like, that's when I start to panic. Like, okay, at least, Russia would, even though there's going to be a lot of casualties here and there, civilian casualties here and there, right? But at least you think the Russian military would somewhat think to before any civilians catch any damage, right? Because in the future they will eventually will have to answer. But when you give something to private military, why would they give a fuck, right? It's on Russia, it's not on them. That's when I start to panic, like how many innocent civilians are gonna get caught in everything, who otherwise wouldn't have been caught, right? Now that's when I start to panic, like this Wagner group, like everything they're conducting, like all these Hollywood movies basically comes to my mind, like how fucked up this is going to turn out, man.
Videos. The conflict in Ukraine remains ongoing at the time of release.
Yeah.
While today the front lines have become much more static than last year, now that the snow has thawed, new offensives have introduced some semblance of movement to the front once more, as Ukraine receives an increasing amount of military aid from the West. Join us next year for the 2023 recap of the war in Ukraine.
Damn, next year. Oh god, I hope this doesn't become a series because that means the war is still stretching. Oh god. All right. That was war in Ukraine in 2022. It was a good summary overall, and I like the animations overall. But yeah, this is really fucked up. Every time, real life lore, like I said, is doing a really great job at covering every detail, right? I was seeing detail and photos that I didn't see before in any media or something. So after seeing those satellite photos of how things are destroyed, that church thing where there's kids are inside and they still didn't care and just bombed it and put a wall around it, that just pissed me off. Like some really inhumane shit is happening, and right now we are just hitting the surface of it. In 10 years or something, right, more and more details will come out and we'll realize how horrible this war is actually are. Like right now, whatever we're hearing, that is just the surface of it. Whatever numbers we're getting is just surface of it. In detail, it would have been it probably is much more. Yeah. Alright, well, that was War in Ukraine summarized 2022 animated history by the channel Armchair Historian. If you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.